Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Warframe guide by me, Maid Makari. Not going to really explain anything about why I'm wearing a maid outfit. Come to the Twitch stream and you might find out why sometime. Now, Nyx has recently had a rework courtesy of the recent Fortuna 2.0 update. If you would like to know more about the changes that have come with this update, I will leave a link to that down in the description. But Nyx had a lovely workover. If you want, pause this video, see exactly what's changed. She has had a lovely amount of change to her to make her a lot more interesting, along with Titania's change as well, which was in a previous video that we did. So I'd recommend taking a glance over that before you give this video a watch, because there has been some things that have changed. We've incorporated that into this video, and we will be going over all that is the wondrousness of Nyx and how she is now somewhat more interesting than what she used to be. Where do we get Nyx from? Nyx is obtained from the Fornix assassination, which is part of the infested invasions. Fornix itself is just a basically oversized infested crawler. There's nothing complicated to it. You go in, you beat his face in. He's got a bit of excess amount of health by comparison to most infested, but it's just a case of mashing it until it dies and then you get a component. Nyx Prime, on the other hand, is currently vaulted, meaning she is not obtainable within the wild, public available relics that are in the game currently. If you want to get a list of all currently vaulted primes, as well as primes that will eventually be unvaulted, and any unvaulted frames that are currently in the game, then there'll be a link to the wiki showing you what is available and what isn't available, which should give you some estimation as to when she may eventually be unvaulted again. Otherwise, the only way you're going to get her now is by grouping up with the people who have her relics, or that's basically it. Or buying her. There is that option as well. The construction of regular Nyx is going to set you back 70,000 credits, 1 Archein cell, 150 alloy plates, 1 neural sensor, 150 polymer, 800 rubido, 1000 ferrite, 2 morphics, 1 control module, 500 salvage, and 220 plastids, as well as an unsightly amount of patience. For Prime, you're going to be set back another 70,000 credits, 2 Archein cells this time, 150 alloy plates, 2 neural sensors, 2,000 salvage, 1,150 rubido, 1,000 nanospores, 3 gallium, 3 control modules, and 500 circuits, and even more patience to wait for her to become unvaulted, or maybe blackmailing a friend to let them give you their vaulted relics. In terms of base stats, at level 30, Nyx will come with 300 health, 300 shields, 15 armor, 225 energy, 1.1 sprint speed, and 2 polarities and a polarity in her aura slot. Similarly to her Prime variant, she comes at level 30 with 300 health, 375 shields, 50 armor, 225 energy, 1.12 sprint speed, 3 polarities instead of the 2 in her regular mod slots, and 1 polarity in her aura slot. Nyx's passive is a very simple and easy one to understand. Enemies have an increased chance to miss Nyx, because apparently she is so blindingly spectacular in how she looks that no enemy can look upon her without going, "Ah, my eyes!" and therefore they just miss her with every single shot they fire at her, apparently. Either way, this is a very useful passive, especially for just getting into missions, not having to worry quite so much about receiving damage. You are still able to be hit, it's just less likely for them to hit you, essentially. Nyx's 1 is called Mind Control. Now, this might be somewhat self-explanatory, but Nyx will cast this ability on an enemy within 60 meters and control their minds. Any enemy that is then affected is under her control for 30 seconds. They are then immune to damage for the duration of this ability, and for the next 4 seconds after activation, the controlled enemy will then be able to absorb damage being dealt to them, which will then be converted to a buff that will be up in the top right next to your health and energy bar. The scaling of this buff only lasts for that 4 seconds, and the bigger the buff gets, the more damage that this enemy will then deal once that wears off, and that is then their set amount of buff they gain for that damage. So when you're choosing the enemy that you're going to mind control, it's very wise to choose which enemy you're going to have controlled for you, as, in my personal opinion, the best enemies to use this on are melee-based enemies. In practice, this is a very fun ability. We put the mind control on target, we shoot them full of damage, and then that dude is going to go running off doing his own merry little thing, bearing in mind that the AI is basically still the same AI that you would deal with normally. The control duration is affected by ability duration, the cast range is affected by ability range, the damage conversion is not affected by anything, however. That is just raw damage you pump into the target that will then be converted into damage for that target to then use. The target will act as normal, and thus the AI of the enemy is a very big limitation. So the target will act as normal, and the enemy would use the same sort of abilities that they would use otherwise. Certain abilities like passives and auras, things like shield generators, will be shut down for the duration of the buff, however. Mind control targets are immune to friendly fire, however, any damage dealt to them will still be inflicted once the mind control ends. So if you pump a bunch of damage into them with your allies, when the mind control wears off, all that damage is then dealt and the target dies. Or at least they should do, assuming that takes away all their health. As I said before, the damage bonus of this the buff they gain is displayed next to the health bar, and mind control allies can also be affected by buffs such as Trinity's Blessing or Safeguard from Nether. Mind control's augment is called Mind Freak. What this does is it will give you a 500% bonus damage to the afflicted target. So not only do you get that initial damage buff from the mind control with whatever damage you pump into that target, but you then gain the 500% bonus damage on top of that as well. So if you thought they were killing things a lot beforehand, they're now going to be absolutely mincing things to death. Nothing more satisfying than watching a butcher literally destroying his friends in one hit. Yes, my little minion, chop chop till your heart's content. Chop, chop, chop. Psychic Bolt is Nyx's 2. Nyx launches 6 bolts of energy that seek out enemies, removing 80% of the target's shields and armor. Slowing infested enemies by 80%, removing enemy auras for 11 seconds. For example, any infested auras that would otherwise be taking away your energy or giving resistances to other enemies. The debuff amount is affected by ability strength, and the ability duration is affected by ability duration. The number of bolts is not affected by any mod, and you are just stuck with the flat 6. The amount of bolts you can have up is only 6. So if you've already cast your 6 bolts with 6 affected enemies, you cannot then go and recast it again unless you hold down your 2 to reset the cast, in which case you can then go away and recast it again on some enemies. The range of your cast is also affected by ability range, so if you cast further away, build range. And in order for this to be recast, you will then need to hold down your 2, as I've mentioned previously. So just use it on the fly to weaken enemies and allow them to be killed easier. Psychic Bolt's augment is called Pacifying Bolt. Pacifying bolts will cause any enemy affected by Psychic Bolt to be stammered, stunned, and seeing images of political rallies for 10 seconds. The duration of this stammer lasts for 10 seconds and is affected by ability duration. So building more duration will lengthen the stun and stammer and political rally images flashing through their heads. Chaos is Nyx's 3. Chaos will affect any enemy within 25 meters once cast, and confuse them, making them think that their allies are in fact Tenno, causing them to fight amongst each other, taking out their petty squabbles between each other. This lasts for 25 seconds, and it will affect the closest enemies first. Affected enemies will then indiscriminately squabble. They will predominantly prioritize non-affected enemies first. So if some enemy comes in from outside the initial affected area, those will be prioritized over the chaos enemies. It will only stun bosses and not control them, however, so keep that in mind. And it will also deactivate auras and shield generators of enemies affected. This is a very good ability to use for crowd control and just causing a bit of mayhem in the area you're in. You, however, can still be attacked during this ability if you stand too close. And the duration of this ability is affected by ability duration mods, as well as the range of said aura is then affected by duration. And the initial cast will obviously then stun the enemies on the cast as well. Chaos's augment is called Chaos Sphere. Enemies that are outside of the aura initially will then become chaosed once entering the aura. This allows for additional enemies to become chaosed, and the aura itself will then start shrinking over time. The more duration you have, the slower the shrink will become. until it completely diminishes at your side. So this gives you essentially more opportunities to chaos incoming enemies. Nyx's 4 is Absorb. Absorb is a very fascinating ability. When cast, Nyx will enter a meditative state and begin to channel. Any damage dealt is then going to be absorbed and converted into a stack that generates more with more damage. The more damage dealt, the more damage is converted into this stack. So long as she is channeling, every second she will generate 200 energy towards this stack, and so long as the stack is above 1,500 at the end of the cast, or when you run out of duration, or when you decide to cancel it by pressing 4 again, it will then deal that damage to any enemy within range, and there will be a passive knockdown to any enemy within 8 yards of the explosion. So not only is this a very good form of crowd control in this knockdown, but the damage it can do is almost infinite based on the damage you're taking. The minimum damage and passive damage gain are affected by ability strength, but the absorbed damage is not. Explosion radius is affected by radius, and if you have if you are channeling this ability, every 1,000 damage absorbed then drains an additional 8 energy as well. This can also be cast whilst in the air, allowing you to hover in the sky like some decorative memorabilia of some kind. Absorb's augment is called Assimilate. When Absorb is activated, you are now able to move at 50% of your normal move speed. As a sacrifice, you then lose also 50% of the radius of your absorbed bubble. So for a sacrifice of a bubble, you gain movement and utility, which can be quite nice. Modding for Nyx can be quite straightforward. Some things to keep in mind though, Nyx has had a long history of being neglected by DE. She's never been tremendously useful in large situations. She's never had much love by the community. She's a lot of fun to play though. And realistically with Nyx, you're going to be focusing a lot on range and duration to take advantage of her mind control, the crowd controls of her stuns, and if you then have an insight for more damage from her 4, then there's a build for that as well. Now, with the current build I'm using here, this one focuses more on her Mind Freak and the crowd control and mind control capabilities. So you have a lot of duration using things like narrow-minded. You've got continuity on there for as much duration as possible. You've got some range with stretch and overextended for the bonus range. This allows you to obviously crowd control as many targets as possible, whilst also maintaining the CCs as well from things like your bolt if you then use the augment. In terms of augments with any of these builds, it is subject to what you would rather use. For example, you can change Mind Freak out for almost anything, much like the second build and the third build I'll show you. The augments are subjective as to how you want to play around, because the Nyx is one of the sort of frames that can make a big difference based on the augments you decide to use. So take it on your own opinion as to what you want to use for the situations you're in, and then sort of work with that. Some of these builds can be very different based on the augments you use. This one in particular, though, I like using Mind Freak because you've got the duration, you've got the range. Chaos Sphere can also work quite well with this build as well, especially because of all that duration, making the sphere grow slower, essentially. Vitality is a mod that I would remove for Chaos Sphere in lowest level situations, or potentially any other survivability mod if you so are inclined. The second build I use is more focused towards range, a little bit less duration, so Chaos Sphere may not be as relevant with this build, but it's still quite nice to have. You could then again change that for more survivability, potentially more duration, maybe more power strength. This build I use as a generalized build, as this works tremendously well for all of her abilities rather than just focusing on her 1 and her 3. So you could again swap out Assimilate for Mind Freak if you want. Having Assimilate just allows you to move around to have that utility, because you're going to be using your 4 a fair bit with this one, as the range is going to allow you to deal more damage in a much larger area with your 4. And the last build, this is a very gimmicky build that I sort of fiddled around with a while ago. This is more just based on having fun at lower levels. This allows your 4 to be able to deal more damage with a bit more range on there. Assimilate is going to be quite nice because you can then move around and just farm lower level missions by killing off enemies, because this is basically going to kill anything up to level 30 without too much issue. You just need to absorb a base amount of damage initially, and this will work quite nicely for you. The Archeins for these builds, you can kind of go with whatever. Energize is always good because you are going to be very heavily using your energy up. And then at that point you can pretty much go with whatever. I personally like Avenger or Fury with these just because I'm a very melee heavy guy. But if you want the more survivability, things like Guardian could be quite nice as well. Hopefully this video has been somewhat informative for you. I am still practicing and learning with these guides, and hopefully you've noticed. If you have any constructive feedback, then please leave a comment in the comment segment below the video, and I will happily read through all of them, and then ignore any ones that talk about Uganda Knuckles, because the amount of comments about that I've seen recently is mildly troubling. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll hopefully see you all in the next video. See you later, my fellow top hatters. Ta-ra!